They said his dad was a joke, a nobody, a quiet man in hoodies who spent too much time alone, fixing things no one could understand, staring up at the sky like he was waiting for someone who never came. At school, they laughed. Your dad looks like he failed math and life, they said. Some of them even meant it. But what no one knew was that the sky had been talking back. And Eli Matthews' father had been listening. Welcome to Heart Story, where we share the stories that the world forgets until they become unforgettable. If you believe in quiet heroes, in truth hidden behind ridicule, stay with us. Because this story, it will change the way you look at silence. 13-year-old Eli Matthews had learned early that kids didn't need a reason to be cruel, but give them a target, and they'd hit it again and again. His father was that target, Noah Matthews, 40 years old. Didn't look like the dads on TV. He wasn't broad-shouldered or booming with confidence. He was slender, soft-spoken, with storm gray hair and eyes that always seemed halfway lost in a distant thought. He wore hoodies year-round, mostly black or navy, and rarely left their small brick house except to shop for groceries or pick up Eli from school. People whispered about him, the unemployed gay guy who spent his days building machines that looked like junk and typing into glowing screens no one understood. But what they didn't see was the small telescope on the upstairs balcony, the stacks of hard drives labeled with cryptic codes, the silent, flickering servers humming through the night. What they didn't know was that Noah worked for NASA. He was a specialist in heliophysics, assigned to remote data analysis and real-time anomaly detection. In simpler terms, he studied the sun, solar flares, radiation waves, gamma burst phenomena that could cripple communication systems, black out satellites, and cause billions in damages if missed. But his role was so deeply classified, he wasn't even allowed to tell his son. And so, the world saw only a man with no job, no presence, and to them, no worth. To Eli, though his dad was a mystery worth protecting. Every night, Noah would invite him to watch the stars, not just with the telescope, but with stories about distant galaxies, rogue planets, how, somewhere out there, light from a dying star was just now reaching their eyes after traveling for thousands of years. The universe, Noah would whisper, doesn't speak loudly, Eli, but it always speaks. Still, love couldn't shield against cruelty, especially at school, where difference was a weakness. Mr. Conrad, the social studies teacher, made sure of that. He didn't hide his disdain for Eli's home life. Too soft, he once said during class. Too dreamy, not grounded in reality. It was clear he had little patience for students like Eli, and even less for fathers like Noah. Every week brought a new remark, a new smirk, a new look from classmates when Eli walked by. He tried not to let it get to him, but the words began to stick. They clung to him like smoke, and all the while, Noah remained the same, quiet, careful, focused. He kept watch on the sun. He kept watch on his son, and in his silence, he was preparing to save the world. If this story already moved you, make sure to subscribe to Heart Story, because what happens next is something no one in that classroom will ever forget. Stay tuned for part 2. The assignment seems simple enough. Write about someone who inspires you, someone real, someone who made you see the world differently. Most of Eli's classmates picked athletes, entrepreneurs, celebrities with shiny lives and famous names. Eli chose Noah. He didn't hesitate. His pen moved like it had been waiting for this chance. He wrote about midnight skies and cold balconies, about how his father would trace constellations with a quiet hand and whisper facts not found in any textbook. He wrote about the soft sound of typing at 3 in the morning and how Noah would sometimes stare at graphs like they were windows into another reality. Most of all, he wrote about how his father never needed to be seen to matter. He titled the essay, "The Hero Who Watches the Sky." When the day came to read it in front of the class, Eli felt proud, nervous, yes, but proud. He adjusted the paper in his hands, heart racing as he stood beside the whiteboard. His voice trembled at first, but strengthened as he spoke. He told them about how Noah taught him to wonder, how to ask better questions, how to listen, how to be okay with being different. But he didn't even get to finish. Fantasy is an inspiration. Eli. The interruption came flat and cold, like a slap to the air. Mr. Conrad didn't even look up from his desk. Next time, maybe write about someone who actually has a job. The silence afterward was so loud it hurt. Then someone snickered. Another voice chimed in. Is your dad gay and unemployed? That's like double useless. The laughter came fast, careless. A rising wave of humiliation that Eli couldn't fight. His throat closed. He stared at the floor, his face hot and burning. The rest of his paper lay unread in his trembling hands. The grade came back the next day. C-, scrawled in red at the bottom, non-academic, overly sentimental. Eli didn't speak on the walk home. Noah asked if everything was all right, but Eli only nodded and said he was tired. At school, nothing changed. Kids whispered, Mr. Conrad acted like it never happened, but someone had noticed. Someone who had been there in the back of the room, sorting books while pretending not to hear. Miss Granger. She wasn't just the librarian. Years ago, she had been a science teacher. She had taught a boy named Noah Matthews, back when he was the quiet one in the back row, back when he'd built a solar tracker out of scrap metal and repurposed fans, back when he'd told her, I don't care if they laugh. I just want to know how light moves. She'd never forgotten him. That afternoon, when the bell rang and the halls emptied, Miss Granger approached the teacher's desk. She asked Mr. Conrad if she could borrow Eli's essay for the student archives. He shrugged and said, Sure, just don't waste space on fairy tales. She scanned it that night, and then she opened her old address book. She still had a contact, Janet Roy, director of communications at NASA, an old college friend, and someone who, years ago, had once said, if you ever come across another one like that Noah kid, send them my way. Miss Granger didn't send a resume. She didn't attach grades. She sent Eli's words, raw, real, trembling with pride and pain. And just beneath the email, she typed, the man in this story isn't fiction. He just never asked to be seen. Then she hit send. Noah Matthews had always known when something was wrong. It was never in the big ways. Eli still did his homework, still sat at the dinner table, still smiled, sometimes. But the quiet had changed. It had become heavy. He avoided eye contact. He lingered longer in his room. He laughed less. Noah didn't press. He knew better than most that some silences take time to unfold. So instead, he waited, gently, carefully, like watching a storm gather behind the clouds. That Thursday night, while Eli slept, Noah sat at his workstation upstairs. The room was filled with quiet hums, the low buzz of cooled servers, monitors casting a faint glow across his face. He sipped lukewarm coffee, eyes fixed on a rolling display of solar telemetry data. Something flickered. He leaned in. The gamma readings on panel 4 were shifting erratically, spikes in radiation levels beyond standard thresholds. At first, he thought it was a calibration issue. He reset the parameters, cross-checked against archived baselines. But no, this was real. A signature of a mass coronal ejection. And it wasn't just forming, it was accelerating. Noah's fingers moved quickly. He accessed secure internal channels and logged an incident alert. The chain of communication was precise, automatic. His message, tagged with level red protocol, bypassed civilian systems and triggered emergency simulations across multiple observatories. Within minutes, NASA's Anomaly Task Force received the alert. The timing was critical. This type of solar event, violent and fast, could disrupt satellite operations across geostationary orbit, knock out communications, even damage power grids, billions in infrastructure at risk, entire continents vulnerable to blackout. But the warning arrived in time, thanks to Noah. He didn't sleep that night, not because he was waiting for recognition, he never expected that, but because he knew what could have happened if he hadn't been watching. If he'd let the sadness in his home cloud his focus. He had stayed quiet, stayed the ghost they all assumed he was, and because of that, lives were protected. The next morning, an internal commendation came through. It was simple, a secure message. Your anomaly report prevented major satellite compromise. Standing ovation from the ops floor. As always, thank you. He read it once, then archived it. No need to tell Eli. The boy already had enough on his shoulders. He returned to his desk and kept working, as if nothing had changed. as if the weight of the sky hadn't just shifted because of his hand, but somewhere else, something had changed. Miles away, inside the headquarters of NASA's Public Affairs Division, a woman named Dr. Janet Roy opened an email titled, "A Student Essay You Need to Read." She clicked, she read, she froze. She hadn't heard Noah Matthews' name in nearly 2 decades. But the words in the essay, the details about a father quietly studying solar flares, teaching his son about the language of the sky, they rang too specific to be coincidence. She leaned back in her chair and smiled. Not many people could read the sun like Noah. Even fewer could remain invisible while saving lives. Janet didn't need to look him up. She knew he'd never be listed, but she could do something else. She picked up the phone. She called the Department of Homeland Security's liaison office. Then she called the NASA outreach team. Then she called a pilot. And by that afternoon, a plan was in motion. Not for recognition, not for spectacle, but for truth. Because some people stay silent for too long. And sometimes, the sky isn't the only thing that needs to be seen. It started like any other school day. The bell rang. The students dragged their feet to class. And Mr. Conrad, rigid as ever, stood by the board, marker in hand, lecturing on real-world responsibility. Eli sat in his usual spot, 2 rows from the front, eyes lowered, body small. The sting from last week hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown sharper with time. The snickers, the whispers, the way no one really looked at him anymore unless it was to smirk. He hadn't told his dad what had happened. He didn't want to add weight to a man already carrying so much. Outside, the morning sun broke through a thin layer of clouds. And then, without warning, the sound came. Low at first, like a distant engine. Then louder, rotors, fast, powerful, a helicopter. The classroom windows trembled. Students glanced up, confused. "Mr." Conrad paused mid-sentence. Then another sound, tires on pavement, car doors slamming, hurried footsteps approaching the school. Within minutes, the principal's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Conrad, please remain in your classroom. We have a special guest arriving." He furrowed his brow, muttered something under his breath, and turned back to the board. But a knock came before he could speak again. The door opened, and everything stopped. A group entered, men and women in dark suits, lanyards glinting with federal seals. Among them, a tall woman with silver hair and steady eyes stepped forward. She wore a NASA badge. Behind her, 2 uniformed Homeland Security officers wheeled in a screen and projector setup, moving with quiet precision. "Good morning," the woman said, her voice calm but commanding. "I'm Dr. Janet Roy. I'm here on behalf of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Mr." Conrad blinked. I wasn't informed you weren't meant to be," she said evenly. "This isn't a visit, it's a message." No one laughed. No one spoke. Janet nodded to her team. The lights dimmed. The screen flickered to life. A digital map of the sun appeared color-coded, pulsing with lines and data points. Janet began to speak. 3 days ago, a coronal mass ejection, a CME, erupted from the sun's surface. It carried the potential to interfere with hundreds of communication satellites. If left undetected, it could have caused blackouts across 3 continents and disrupted emergency services for millions. She clicked the remote. A red burst bloomed on the map. This anomaly was detected not by a facility, not by a robot, not even by a full-time on-site team, but by one man, working alone. In this town, her voice paused. She turned to the class. "That man is Dr. Noah Matthews." A collective silence fell over the room. Every head turned to Eli. He froze. Janet continued. "Dr. Matthews submitted an emergency alert that triggered a global response. Thanks to his vigilance, multiple satellite systems were recalibrated in time. No outages occurred, no lives were lost. He remained anonymous until this essay came across my desk." She held up a printed page, Eli's handwriting unmistakable. "My hero who watches the sky." Janet looked straight at him. "Eli, your father didn't just save satellites, he saved lives. And he never asked for credit." The air shifted. The students were no longer smirking. Some looked stunned. A few looked ashamed. "Mr." Conrad's face had drained of color. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Janet stepped closer to Eli's desk. She placed a small black case in front of him. Inside, A badge gleamed in polished silver emblazoned with the NASA insignia and 6 small engraved words. Legacy isn't loud, it orbits. Eli blinked hard. He couldn't speak. And then finally Mr. Conrad moved. He cleared his throat, adjusted his tie, and with halting words, said, "Eli, I owe you and your father an apology. I misjudged." Janet said nothing. She didn't need to. By the time the team left the classroom, nothing about it felt the same. Not the desks, not the air, not the boy who sat 2 rows from the front. They asked Noah to speak. For a moment, he didn't move. He stood near the classroom doorway, where he'd quietly entered while the presentation played, unnoticed by most. His hoodie was zipped to the collar, hands still tucked into his pockets, eyes steady. Then he stepped forward. The students, including those who had once laughed, now stared in stunned silence. "Mr." Conrad shifted uncomfortably behind his desk. Noah didn't give a speech. He didn't lecture, didn't bask in the attention. He simply looked at his son, really looked, and then turned to the class. "Sometimes," he said, his voice calm but unshakably sure, "the most important work is done where no one can see. That doesn't mean it doesn't matter. No grand closing, no applause, just truth." He placed a gentle hand on Eli's shoulder and nodded to Janet before leaving the room as quietly as he'd entered. Later that afternoon, the school sent out a formal announcement. Mr. Conrad was placed on administrative leave pending review for inappropriate conduct and repeated discriminatory remarks. It wasn't just about Eli anymore. Students and parents came forward with years of subtle and not so subtle bias. The silence had broken. Eli's essay was republished in the local newspaper the next day. The headline read, "My Dad Watches the Sky, a son's story of a hidden hero." Within hours, it spread online. A national magazine picked it up, then science blogs, then a clip from Janet's speech at the school surfaced. And within days, the hashtag #MyDadSavedEarth was trending across platforms, not out of spectacle, but out of awe. Strangers from all over wrote messages of thanks and support. LGBTQ+ youth commented that they finally saw someone like them represented as a hero. Parents said they cried reading Eli's words. And teachers, thousands of them, used the story to remind students that real strength often looks like stillness. At home, life didn't change much. Noah still worked late nights, still stared up at the stars. Eli still had homework, still helped with dinner, but something between them had shifted. They no longer had to carry the weight of being invisible. One evening, while rummaging through a box of old tech parts, Eli found a letter, folded neatly, hidden in the shadows of the past. The ink was faded, but the words were still clear. "I don't care if the world never knows what I did. I just hope you'll always know who I am." Eli sat with it for a long time. Then he whispered, almost to himself, "Now they all do." He slipped the letter back into the box, not to hide it, but to keep it safe. Some things weren't meant to be forgotten. Some names didn't need spotlights, just space, to orbit. What would you do if the world misunderstood someone you loved? Tell us below. And if this story touched your heart, follow Heart Story for more true tales that give quiet voices the power to echo far beyond the noise. Because here, silence speaks.